Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here. Sunday, the 4th of December 2016. First dog on the moon.
You'll hear more about that later, but first dog on the moon. Well, he will be critically involved. Hello, patriots. I'm First Dog on the Moon, Walkley Award-winning cartoonist for The Guardian Australia, and this is the penultimate edition of First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living. Friends, our time has almost come to an end. But the good news is that in 2017, the guide is going to continue, albeit in a different form. It may well be turned into a live stage show which will tour the nation, and also possibly a book which will hopefully be in the shops for Christmas next year. This is actually true, and I know I bullshit you a great deal on this show, pretty much all the time, but right now, I'm not. Stay tuned. But enough about me. Oh, who am I kidding? When was this ever about anything else? Since its humble beginnings 4 years ago, the Guide to Modern Living has set the weekly political and media agenda for this once great nation. The team here at Guide headquarters thought it would be timely to take a look back at some of the highlights, the lowlights, some of the game-changing moments in Guide history. As former Prime Minister Tony Abbott said, "Whither goeth the Guide to Modern Living, goeth the nation." Because, as all journalists know, it's not a story if you're not the story. And funnily enough, that's our motto. We have a long and proud history. Our first ever outside broadcast was the time we stumbled upon Scott Morrison as he tried to deliver a boatload of asylum seekers to the Indonesian embassy on the back of a truck. Let's have a listen. All right, everyone on the boat, shut up. I'm just going to see if anyone's in the embassy. I'll try that again. Hello? Is anyone home? It is I, Scott Morrison. I'm the Minister for Immigration. Oh, there's someone peeking through that curtain. Come on out, Mr. Udiono, we can see you. We're particularly proud of that report, not just because we won a Walkley for it. Then there was our groundbreaking expose of former Prime Minister Jelaya Gillard, and that one time she was riding her Segway past the kitten hospital and there was a fire. So she hand-knitted a rescue helicopter and everyone escaped. Yay! And remember this classic? You can't do that to me. I'm Prime Minister Tony Abbott. Oh, not my budgie smugglers. And who could forget the episode when we discovered opposition leader Bernd Stollen was actually made entirely of polystyrene? Or the time we built a trebuchet out of old beer bottle tops and used it to fire George Christensen into the sun.
We have a liftoff.
But he came back. And this was a classic episode. And this. But we never did this. I wish we had. I remember fondly that day we milked a whale. Or when we pushed George Brandis into a vat of radioactive pastry cream. And he became the mysterious superhero, the Crock'em-Boosh. Not very good Attorney General by day, and bumbling French dessert by night. Bonjour. Oh, excusez-moi. Haven't we had fun, patriots? Well, I have. Nobody cares about what you think. You listen to Radio National. Seriously, though, I've loved it, and I want to thank each and every one of you for putting up with my extremely self-indulgent dung. So don't forget to tune in for next week's last ever guide, our annual Christmas Panther. This has been First Dog on the Moon's Guide to Modern Living, proudly brought to you by the First Dog on the Moon Institute. You're welcome.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, as they mentioned in The Outsiders, we're getting a bit of a better idea of what President Trump is going to be. I'm spoonerising him. Personally, it's the only reasonable response. So, Tronald Dump is, I think, the best way to refer to that bloke. He is reported to have rung up the Argentine president to put pressure on the Argentinian court system regards some kind of litigation over a half-built hotel project that's going to have his name on it. He says he's going to divest himself of all his business connections and let his children run his business. That's not actually a blind trust, like the gentlemanly, noble thing, the honourable thing to do would be to sell everything he owns and put the money in the bank and get on with being president. And then after he's finished with being president, then he gets the money back out of the bank and re-enters business. He seems to want to let his kids run his affairs, but at the same time, he let his daughter, who not only took the opportunity of his inaugural press appearance to wear a bracelet that she then advertised on her website for $10,300 as a fashion item. He took her into his meeting with the Japanese President Abe, or Prime Minister Abe, whatever he is. And Abe gave Trump a $4,000 hand-milled golf club. And there's a thing called the Emoluments Act, which, as far as I know, is to stop foreign powers from greasing the palms of the American president. So it's technically, if he had been the inaugurated president, he would have already got himself impeached for accepting the golf club. This week, he's rung up Pakistan's prime minister and told the Pakistanis what a fantastic bunch of fantastic people, the most intelligent people that he's ever met, living in a fantastic country, and he wants to be as close as he possibly can to Pakistan. America has supplied weapons and advisors and backed Pakistan in about 3 wars against India. And at the moment, they're arguing over an international boundary that's marked by bloody flags on a glacier, and every time the glacier wiggles, the border guards on both sides of the ice decide that the other side's been bastard, so they fire at each other. And they're both nuclear-armed countries. He's accepted a phone call from the Taiwanese president and thereby offended the Chinese. I think the very first time the United States Navy or the US Air Force, or one of its proxies, and that includes the Royal Australian Air Force, tries to overfly the Chinese base on the Spratly Islands after Trump is elected, I predict that aircraft will be shot down. Not shot at, shot down. The Chinese will put a very firm foot on the ground, line in the sand communication out there, something that even Donald Trump can't misunderstand. There was a while when I was considering that maybe he was a really super clever person who was just pretending to be an idiot. But the way he's behaving, no, I think he really is an idiot. He's picked his Secretary of Defense as a retired American general, I think he is, whose nickname was the Mad Major. And Donald Trump describes him as being, he's the nearest thing we've got to General George Patton. Now, I remind those who haven't seen the movie or read the book or studied any modern history, George Patton was the bloke who 3 weeks after Hitler shot himself was pressuring American and English militaries to back him up because he reckoned he could pick a fight with the Soviets and have them at war within 2 weeks. And then he wanted to do what all of the Germans had hoped would occur, which was for the German defeated army to be used as reinforcements for the Allied army to take, or the English and American army to take on the Soviets, because the Germans were firmly convinced that Soviet communism was a pestilential scourge that was threatening Europe and it had to be wiped out. That's what the Germans believed, and they figured the English and the Americans would help them defeat Russia. They actually did studies on it. You know, Churchill got his general staff to figure out what would happen if we and the Americans lined up with the Germans and attacked Russia, and they reckoned they would have got no further than Hitler did. So that's why it didn't happen. But yeah, that's what Patton was most famous for. I mean, apart from getting himself in disgrace for swearing at and physically smacking a soldier in a hospital bed with what we would call these days PTSD. Back those days, it was battle fatigue. And Patton didn't believe it. He didn't feel it. He was one of the people who have 2 copies of Human Killer Gene, and he couldn't see anything wrong with a wartime environment. He fucking loved it. He got around with a pair of bloody ivory-handled revolvers. Now, Patton was a Fruit Loop, a murderous Fruit Loop, and that's what Trump has appointed. The fella hasn't been elected. He's just been appointed by the president. The president of America gets to appoint his cabinet. All of the people he thinks will be good at doing a job. Right, you're now in charge of this. You're in charge of that. Whereas back here in Australia, as I was making my video about the marvellous disappearing signs that Barnaby Joyce put up on his road to recovery from deep water to the dump, as I was doing that, the Greens stepped up and pulled a surprise in the Senate, and they allowed the government's backpacker tax to go through at the 15% rate. They secured $100 million of, quote, extra, unquote, funding for the Landcare movement. The trouble is Landcare's lost something like $400 million worth of funding in the last couple of years. So they clawed back half of the money Landcare's lost. They also succeeded in getting the government to agree that Australia would only steal 65% of the superannuation contributions which are made by backpackers, because the backpackers are never going to be here to collect the superannuation. And in Australia, if you work for anybody for any kind of wages, by law, 10% of that money has to go into a superannuation account, so that when you retire, you will have a big chunky lump sum of money to live on, and the government won't have to pay you a pension. What actually happens is the grain nomads buy themselves a Winnebago and they drive around National Highway number 1 on the old age pension until they break down or the vehicle does. So yeah, we were stealing 92% of the 10% that we were pulling out of their money. Now we're only going to steal 65%. So the Greens have done a fairer deal than anybody else was interested in. Everybody else was just keeping a quiet mouth, you know, totally being silent about the 10% that was being stolen from the wages of backpackers. They were only discussing the tax. Oh, the tax this, the tax that. Yeah, but 15% tax, probably going to come in at about a 21% effective rate when you get the superannuation plus the tax. And yeah, backpackers are not going to be here. They should have the same tax-free threshold as all the other Australian citizens do. And I have to have a shout out to VB Ed in Western Australia, my tax accountant mate. The Australian tax-free threshold is not $5,000. It's $18,200. It's pretty much the same as the dole. Yeah, so that's the kind of week that it's been. Donald Trump making an idiot of himself, the Australian government making a fool of itself, the opposition making a fool of itself, Pauline Hanson coming out as being the most stable, predictable person in the whole of the bloody Senate, and the Greens settling the dispute by deciding to vote with the government, who said they would never, ever, ever do any deals with the Greens. Yeah, it's an interesting world that we're living in. I wonder what's going to happen when Prissydunce Tronald Dump actually gets given the keys to the nuclear football. Life will get very interesting, very Chinese cursey. May you live in interesting times, because, you know, you might get a history book that says there was peace in the land for 100 years and then the emperor wanted to have a war. Then there's 10 pages of death and destruction talking about the interesting things that happened in the war. And then there was peace in the land again. until there was a flood or a fire or a drought. Speaking of that, St George has been getting baked, just as I said it deserved to a week ago. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.